The sugar-spun grass felt sticky beneath my bare feet, not with dew, but with something thick and dark. The air, usually sweet with the promise of spring on Easter morning, tasted of dust and something metallic, like old pennies left on a damp windowsill. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The invitation had been simple. Come celebrate Easter with us, at the old family home. It's been too long. My Aunt Alara, a woman I hadn't seen in 15 years, had written it in her elegant, slightly spidery hand. She'd inherited the sprawling, isolated estate after my grandmother's passing. A place I hadn't visited since I was a child. Back when Easter meant pastel-dyed eggs, hidden in genuinely green grass, and the only terror was finding a rotten one by mistake. This year, terror had a different flavor. I arrived 2 days before Easter Sunday, the house looming on the hill like a forgotten god. It wasn't derelict, not exactly, but time had painted streaks of melancholy down its stone face, and the overgrown gardens clutched at it, like skeletal hands. Aunt Alara greeted me with a frail hug that felt more like she was trying to hold herself together than embrace me. She was thinner than I remembered, her eyes wide and a little too bright, darting around as if looking for something just out of sight. Other family members trickled in. Distant cousins I barely recognized, a great uncle I'd only met once. The atmosphere wasn't festive. It was strained, punctuated by awkward silences and forced smiles. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells, though what fragile thing we were protecting I couldn't tell. The house itself felt different, heavier. Shadows clung to corners even in the daytime, and the old floorboards groaned like tired bones with every step. The first truly unsettling thing happened on Saturday evening. We were in the dining room, attempting a stilted dinner. Aunt Alara, who had barely touched her food, suddenly rose. "The eggs," she announced, her voice thin but carrying an odd resonance. "We must prepare the eggs." I expected the usual ritual, boiling and dyeing eggs with kits bought from the store. But Aunt Alara led us not to the kitchen, but to the conservatory. A vast, glass-paned room that felt cold, despite the spring evening. In the center stood a large, antique wooden table. Piled on it were hundreds, maybe thousands, of plain white eggs. Beside the eggs were bowls of strange, viscous liquids, and jars filled with things I didn't want to identify. Dried leaves, powders, small, brittle-looking fragments. "We don't dye them," Aunt Alara explained, picking up an egg with almost reverent care. "We prepare them for the soil, for the rebirth." She then proceeded to paint symbols on the eggs, using the strange liquids. Not bunnies or flowers. These were intricate, geometric patterns, some vaguely resembling runes I'd seen in old books, others completely alien and unsettling. The other family members watched, some with blank faces, others with a quiet intensity that made my skin crawl. One cousin, Martha, a woman usually prone to nervous chatter, simply nodded along, her eyes fixed on Aunt Alara's hands. "This is a very old tradition," Aunt Alara murmured, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "From before the usual holidays. It's about encouraging the earth, helping things come back." As the night wore on, the air grew colder, despite the lack of a draft. The moonlight filtering through the glass roof seemed to twist the shadows into unsettling shapes. My head began to ache, a dull, persistent throb behind my eyes. I tried to paint a few eggs, mimicking the patterns, but my hand felt clumsy, and the symbols seemed to writhe on the smooth surface. The smell of the liquids was cloying, a mix of damp earth, something sickly sweet, and an acrid tang I couldn't place. It reminded me faintly of blood. Around midnight, exhausted and deeply unnerved, I excused myself and went upstairs to the room I'd been given. Sleep didn't come easily. The house groaned and sighed around me. I heard whispers, not clear voices, but faint murmurs that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I told myself it was just the old house settling, the wind, but the whispers sounded like they were just on the edge of understanding, just shy of forming words. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams were filled with disturbing imagery. Cracked eggs leaking darkness, roots twisting into human shapes, and the unsettling blank stares of my family members. I woke to the sound of tapping. Gentle at first, then more insistent. It was coming from the window. I sat up, my heart pounding. It was still dark outside, the sky a deep, bruised purple. Tapping again. I crept to the window, peering out. There was nothing. Just the skeletal branches of the trees outside, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. I sighed, telling myself I was just on edge. Then I saw it. Stuck to the outside of the window pane, impossibly, was an egg. One of the eggs Aunt Lara had painted. It was the only thing out there, clinging to the glass, as if glued there. And as I watched, a hairline crack snaked across its surface. From the crack seeped not yolk or white, but a thin, black fluid that ran down the glass like a tear. A choked gasp escaped my lips. This wasn't right. How did it get there? Who put it there? I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Had someone been outside? Was it a prank? But the height, it was 2 stories up, and the fluid. I spent the rest of the pre-dawn hours huddled under the covers, listening. The whispers were back, louder now, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from everywhere. From under the floorboards, from within the walls, from the empty hallway outside my door. They were a riot of sibilant sounds, clicks, and guttural murmurs that merged into a terrifying, wordless chorus. It felt like the house itself was groaning as it woke up. When dawn finally broke, casting weak, gray light into the room, the egg was gone. The black streak remained, a gruesome smudge on the glass. Easter Sunday. The air felt thick with anticipation, not of joy, but of something else. The family gathered downstairs, not in their Sunday best, but in practical dark clothing. They moved with a quiet purpose, their faces grim but resolute. Breakfast was a silent affair. No hot cross buns, no chocolate, just a plain, dense bread and water. Aunt Lara sat at the head of the table, her eyes fixed on the window. "It is time," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She led us outside. The morning fog lay thick and heavy, clinging to the ground and obscuring the shapes of the ancient trees at the edge of the property. In the center of the largest clearing, a patch of ground had been freshly turned, and scattered across it were the prepared eggs. Hundreds of them, the strange symbols glinting faintly in the weak light. "We bury them," Aunt Lara explained, picking up a small trowel. "Each one is a promise, a return." A chill went down my spine. Burying eggs? Like offerings? It felt less like a celebration, and more like a ritual sacrifice. The other family members began picking up trowels and digging small holes, placing the eggs carefully inside, patting the earth down. They moved with an unsettling, almost robotic efficiency. I hesitated. This felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Aunt Lara," I started, "what exactly is this tradition for?" She looked at me, her eyes holding a strange mixture of pity and impatience. "For the return, dear. For the earth to give back what was taken." What was taken? The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. As the morning progressed, the fog seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on us. Muffling sounds. The air grew colder. The earth, despite being freshly turned, felt strangely resistant to the trowels, as if something beneath the surface didn't want to be disturbed. My hands trembled as I dug a small hole, the soil cold and damp. I picked up an egg, one with a particularly intricate, swirling symbol. As my fingers closed around it, I felt a faint vibration, like something humming deep within the shell. I almost dropped it. I forced myself to place it in the hole and pushed the earth over it. As I did, I felt a sudden sharp tug on my ankle. I cried out, stumbling back. Looking down, I saw nothing, just the turned earth. But the tug had been real, visceral, like a hand had briefly reached up from beneath the ground. Panic began to set in, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I looked around at my family. They were still digging, burying eggs, their faces expressionless, lost in their task. None of them seemed to have heard my cry. They were completely oblivious. Or worse, they were pretending to be. "Aunt Alara," I called out, my voice trembling. "Did you feel that?" She didn't look up. "Feel what, dear? The blessings of the soil?" Her words were like a stone dropped in my gut. Blessings? This felt like a curse. I started backing away from the clearing. Slowly at first, then faster. I needed to get away from the eggs, from the turned earth, from the chilling focus in my family's eyes. I stumbled through the fog, the trees appearing as dark, menacing shapes. I ran back to the house, the heavy door slamming shut behind me with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent halls. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whispers were louder in here, swirling around me, more distinct. I could almost make out words now, fragments of sentences that made no sense, yet filled me with dread. Buried deep. Waiting for the sun. They gave him back. Who gave who back? What was buried? I ran upstairs to my room, locking the door behind me. I went to the window. The black streak was still there. I looked out towards the clearing, but the fog was too thick. I could see nothing, but I could feel it. A palpable sense of activity out there. A dark energy pulsing through the mist. Suddenly, I heard movement in the hallway, footsteps, slow, deliberate, heading towards my door. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard anyone come back into the house. Who was it? One of my cousins? Aunt Alara. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Silence. A long, agonizing silence. Then, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Scrape. 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 My blood ran cold. This wasn't a person. This was something else. A low murmur came from the other side of the door. It wasn't a whisper. It was a deep, resonant sound, vibrating through the wood, filling the air with a sense of immense, ancient power. It sounded like roots shifting in the earth. The doorknob began to turn, slowly. It was locked. I'd locked it, but it was turning. Panic erupted within me. I scrambled back from the door, looking around wildly for an escape. The window. I am 2 stories up, but it's better than facing whatever was on the other side of that door. I flung open the window, the cold air hitting my face. The black streak felt sticky under my fingers. Below, shrouded in fog, the ground was invisible. The doorknob clicked. The lock was giving way. I didn't hesitate. I swung my leg over the windowsill, the cold stone biting into my skin. I could still hear the scraping, the low murmur, the sound of the door groaning inwards. Taking a deep breath, I pushed myself off the sill, falling into the thick white embrace of the fog. I landed hard, the impact jarring my teeth. The fog cushioned the fall somewhat, but pain shot up my leg. I lay there for a moment, gasping, tasting soil and something else, something metallic and coppery. Scrambling to my feet, I limped away from the house, pushing through the dense fog. My ankle throbbed with every step. I had to get away. Far away from the house, from the family, from the buried eggs and the things that scraped at doors. The fog disoriented me. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. The familiar landscape of the estate was completely hidden. I stumbled over roots, scraped against unseen branches. The whispers were here too, in the fog, all around me. A chorus of unsettling sounds that felt like they were burrowing into my mind. They bloom when the sun returns. His garden. We feed him. Feed him? Who were they feeding? I heard a sound behind me, a wet dragging noise, followed by a low guttural moan. I froze, listening. It was close, too close. I forced myself to move, limping faster, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle. The sounds followed, gaining on me. More dragging, more moaning, and then the distinct sound of earth being disturbed, of roots being pulled from the ground. I burst through the edge of the fog, gasping, and found myself in a different part of the estate, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't garden. It was a field, a vast, open field of dark, disturbed earth. And sticking out of the earth, like grotesque, pale shoots, were things. They were long, pale white, and segmented, like enormous grubs or roots. They twisted and writhed in the dim light, slowly pushing their way up from the ground. Some were topped with bulbous, glistening sacs that pulsed with a faint, internal light, and scattered amongst them, half buried in the soil, were the eggs. The painted eggs. My eyes widened in horror as I finally understood. The eggs weren't offerings. They were nourishment for these things growing from the earth. I heard the dragging sound again, closer now. Turning, I saw a figure emerging from the fog at the edge of the field. It was one of my cousins, Thomas, but he wasn't walking. He was dragging himself along the ground. His limbs twisted at unnatural angles, his body contorted, his face was pale and slack, his eyes wide and unseeing. And from his mouth, instead of sounds, emerged a low, rasping moan that wasn't human. As he dragged himself forward, I saw that his body seemed to be merging with the ground, like his flesh was dissolving into the soil, leaving behind only the pale, segmented forms that writhed beneath the surface. He reached one of the writhing shoots, and with a sickening, wet sound, pressed his face against the pulsing sac at its tip. The sac seemed to swell, drawing something from him. Other figures emerged from the fog. My Aunt Alara, Martha, the others. They were all moving in the same unnatural way, their bodies distorted, their eyes vacant. They were dragging themselves towards the field, towards the things growing there. The return. He wakes. His children feed. The whispers were loud and clear now, coming from the earth itself, from the writhing shoots, from the distorted figures of my family. He wakes. His children feed. This wasn't an Easter celebration. It was a resurrection, but not of life, of something ancient, something hungry, something buried deep beneath the earth, for centuries, waiting for the right time, the right nourishment. And my family, they weren't just participating, they were becoming part of it. I had to get away. I had to warn someone. But who would believe me? Who would believe that the Easter Bunny was really a monstrous earthbound entity feeding on human flesh and the strange energy from painted eggs? I turned and ran, my injured ankle screaming in protest. I ran blindly, away from the field, away from the moaning figures, away from the sickening sight of things that should not be growing from the earth. The fog began to dissipate slightly as the sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting a weak, eerie light on the landscape. I could see more clearly now, and what I saw sent a fresh wave of terror through me. The estate wasn't just a house on a hill. It was surrounded by miles and miles of this disturbed earth, this field of writhing, pale shoots. It wasn't a small patch, it was vast. And at the center of the field, looming against the clearing sky, was something else. Something enormous. It was a mound of earth, incredibly large, pulsating faintly. And from the top of the mound, several of the pale, segmented forms emerged, thicker and more developed than the others, reaching towards the sky like obscene, reaching fingers. This was it. The source. The he they were feeding. I ran harder, ignoring the pain, ignoring the whispers that now felt like they were inside my own head. I could hear the dragging sounds behind me, the moans of my transformed family members. They were following. I reached the edge of the estate property, the old, crumbling stone wall marking the boundary. It seemed impossibly far, but I had made it. Freedom was just on the other side. I scrambled up the wall, my fingers tearing on the rough stone. I could hear them closer now, their wet, dragging progress across the field. I risked a glance back. They were closer than I thought, a dozen or more figures, contorted and grotesque, dragging themselves across the field towards the wall. Their eyes, though vacant, seemed fixed on me, and the whispers intensified, a unified, chilling chorus now. Stay with us. Join the garden. Feed him. I hauled myself over the top of the wall, my leg catching on a loose stone, sending a fresh wave of agony through me. I tumbled down the other side, landing in a ditch filled with damp leaves. I lay there for a moment, gasping, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. I could still hear the sounds from the other side of the wall, the scraping, the moaning, the rustling of the writhing things in the field. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. I was outside the estate. I was free. But as I looked back at the wall, at the top of the stone, something caught my eye. Clinging to the very top of the wall, impossibly, was another egg, one of the painted eggs. Its symbols seemed to pulse faintly in the weak sunlight. And as I watched, a hairline crack snaked across its surface. From the crack seeped not yolk or white, but a thin black fluid that ran down the stone like a tear. The whispers came from the egg, from the wall, from the air around me, though I was miles from the field. The garden spreads. He is hungry. You will return. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just been burying eggs on the property. They had been spreading them, leaving them. And whatever was growing there, it wasn't confined to the estate. The black fluid dripped from the egg onto the stone. It wasn't just a tear, it was like an eye, watching me, judging me, waiting for me. I stood there, frozen, the reality of what I had witnessed crashing down on me. My family was gone, transformed into feeders for some ancient monstrous entity. The estate was a breeding ground, and the horror wasn't contained. It was spreading, one painted egg, one black tear, at a time. And the whispers, they were no longer just sounds in the air. They were in my head. A promise, a threat. You will return. Happy Easter. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. The sun, finally breaking fully through the clouds, felt not like warmth, but like a spotlight, exposing me, marking me. The garden was waiting, and I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never truly be free. The seeds had been planted, and they were waiting for me to bloom. Sweet dreams.